One night, around a campfire with tons of stars filling the night sky, you notice one of those stars getting brighter. The next night, the bright star you noticed was there again, but brighter still. It shined with an ominous glow. Something in the back of your head started making you panic, but you don't know why. The following night, it came. It looked like a world much different than the Earth, just hanging in the sky, surrounded by stars, battered and bruised, with striking gray features. This was the day the moon arrived. The story you just heard is a story some ancient cultures have shared. The ancient Greeks, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and many people in regions famous from the Bible all spoke about a time before the moon was here. Often these were analogous to a long time ago. We would also call them exaggerations, often to make a point at the time. However, it's important to consider the fact that some, if not many of these examples, may actually be suggesting that the moon wasn't always here. There are ancient oral traditions from nomadic tribes that have also discussed a time before the moon. Should these people be considered, or at least taken seriously? It's also strange that ancient people drew on the sides of cave walls. Not strange as in drawing on them, but what they drew. Animals and sometimes images that could be of the night sky. And yet none of them seem to depict the moon. At least none that I've seen or heard of. This could be another compelling argument that the moon hasn't always been around the Earth. So with these stories, both oral and written, alluding to the idea that the moon was not always present in our night sky, should we not consider the stories at least a little? Some may claim that the moon isn't natural. Let's explore why. There have been many odd claims surrounding the moon over the years, from its origin to what may be living on its surface. One such claim is that the moon is an alien spacecraft or an artificial planetoid placed near Earth for an unknown reason by a powerful alien force. Another is that the moon is also theorized to be hollow. This one is thought to be supported by the fact that the craters over the entire surface of the moon are roughly the same depth, no matter how wide the crater is. This is very, very strange, to say the least. It violates many principles that we understand in modern science today. Either something is happening here that is not explored, enough at least when it comes to physics, or it's further evidence that the theory that the moon is artificial may in fact be true. In addition to these, there are mysterious lights flashing on the surface of the moon. While there is some science to substantiate the reasons for why this occurs, there are also several odd things about this that are disproved, or several things that science would substantiate. There are some that also claim that there are non-natural structures on the moon's surface. These structures are not visible to the naked eye, but as you get closer, these structures supposedly become more apparent and have been removed from NASA photographs by photo editing technology that they developed. In regards to this, it should be noted that NASA has been caught doctoring photos since their inception. Honestly, not good. If you're a defense attorney on their case, it's almost like trying to defend a person by saying they didn't shoot this victim even though they've been known to shoot many people before. Honestly, not great. Beyond this, there are also reports that mysterious lights followed Apollo 11 to the moon. If you guys have been watching the channel long enough, you'll probably remember the time when we talked about this before. But we're going to talk about it a little bit more today. And there is evidence of this. This evidence directly comes from Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong. Both astronauts reported that there was a bright light coming through the only porthole in the craft, causing them to be unable to sleep. There are more scientific claims when you look at sediment from the moon. The oldest sediment is actually on the surface of the moon. As you dig further into the ground, the particles become younger. It's very difficult to explain how this happens, since this is the exact opposite of what you'd expect on Earth. Almost unworldly. The moon is not the Earth. specifically where the oldest layers are on the bottom and the newest on top. On the moon, this seems to be different. In the same findings, extremely rare elements, such as tritium, are common throughout the moon's surface. Minerals such as these are not commonly found on the Earth, but in the center of the most massive stars, or they need to be created artificially, and yet they're here. There is a compelling argument to be made that perhaps the true natural surface of the moon is just one giant tritium shell. Honestly, if you're going to travel throughout space and the moon is actually an alien spacecraft, you would be very fortunate to have a craft entirely made of tritium. Tritium is incredibly good at reflecting many of the most dangerous effects of intergalactic or interstellar travel. Those are some of the many things we have heard about the moon and other rumors and conspiracies. So let's take a look at these. Which ones are obviously made up, and which ones have some substance to them? First off, let's discuss the claim that the moon is an alien object. Because we can't point to an alien race, we cannot prove the moon is an alien object as of yet. This is true in the same way that we can't prove the existence of God. However, I strongly believe that the moon is indeed strange. For starters, the moon is just way, way too big. With its size, it could be thought of as a base of surveillance for whatever alien race might be watching over the Earth to report back what they've seen. But if this is not the case, and if the moon wasn't originally there, and it wasn't some alien craft, how was it placed there? How did it appear? Well, scientists have a few hypotheses. The first theory we'll cover is the giant impact theory. The giant impact theory, or hypothesis, discusses the idea that the moon was formed as a result of a collision with a Mars-sized world with the early proto-Earth. As a result of this particular collision, the cores of the two worlds fused into a single core, which would explain why our core is composed of two cores today. It further hypothesizes that the ejecta from the collision was sent into orbit around the Earth, which then coalesced into the celestial body we know today. It should be noted that there are serious issues with this particular theory. The first issue has to do with the composition of the moon itself. The moon has very, very, very little water in its rocks, as proven by the samples that have been collected and returned from the Apollo missions. Secondly, the vast number of cavities checkered throughout the moon indicates that it has vast hollow areas, further suggesting that the moon had highly volcanic activity at one point in time. The third issue is that the moon does indeed have a core of its own. Given the modeling that was associated with the collision, the theory that would have it be, although very difficult for the moon, to have retained a core if it recoalesced from such an. The next two theories, the fission theory and the accretion theory, are both very similar in orientation. They both suggest in one manner or another that the moon coalesced from material that was either formed around the Earth or was secreted from the Earth as the Earth spun, and that the collection of those materials coalesced into the moon. The issue with these two theories are also similar. Assuming that the moon was made of ingredients and materials similar to the Earth, then the composition of the moon would also be similar to the Earth. This is proven to be not the case from the lunar regolith that was delivered to NASA by the Apollo missions. While there are a lot of similarities with the moon, there are a lot of striking differences. Water composition is the biggest one that can be easily pointed to, but there is also very little mineralization. At the same time, there are places on the surface of the moon that have very interesting chemistry involved that is not found on the Earth. Due to these facts, the particular theories can very likely be dismissed based on the evidence. Finally, there's the capture theory. Now, let's be real, this is one of my favorites. The theory essentially goes like this. The moon was traveling on its way to the inner solar system, either by another celestial body as its moon, or it was an independent body moving through the system. However, it was moving slow enough and in such an orbit that the Earth's gravitational effects overcame the moon's gravity and caused the moon to get captured within the Earth's gravitational field and becoming Earth's new moon. Unfortunately, there are several issues with this particular theory. I'm just going to hit the broad strokes of the two that matter the most. The first is that the moon is just too big. The moon is roughly the fourth of the size of the Earth. A fourth. There are no other true moons in our solar system that are even close to this size or of this proportions in comparison to their respective planets. Even the gas giants like Jupiter, which have many, many moons that are large in composition in relation to our moon, but they are extremely tiny in comparison to the planets that they orbit. Our moon stands out because it doesn't follow the same size ratio in comparison to other planets in our system. And an object that big is more likely to collide with the Earth or get flung off in a different direction rather than orbiting the Earth. The second major issue, which is just as significant as the first, has to do with the moon's orbit. The moon has one of the most circular orbits of any celestial body in the solar system. It isn't a perfect circle, but it's damn near one. It'd be very difficult for a captured body to have such an orbit because of the particular effects. I would also dismiss this particular theory. However, it's important to note that just because I dismiss a theory, it doesn't mean I won't entertain it. And I would encourage everyone to also entertain these ideas because you can come to your own conclusions and figure out why or why not. Every particular theory should be examined and looked into, no matter how crazy. It might sound like such a good thing, but maybe not. The next thing is the moon might be hollow. Of course, no. Not that kind of hollow. I meant hollow isn't empty. The scientific answer to this is that either the moon is hollow or is believed to be somewhat hollow in its honeycombed nature. This meaning that it's kind of built like Swiss cheese, as it were, like with little holes and whatnot. The first fact is that when the Apollo 12 mission, arrived and then left the moon, they actually crashed a portion of the lunar module into the side of the moon. By the scientists using specialized equipment, they were able to detect that the moon was actually ringing like a bell for a very, very long time. On Earth, this phenomena could only occur if there were subterranean cavities in the area where an object struck. If the moon is similar to the Earth in this regard, then such a hollow structure could explain why the moon rang like a bell. As to the hypothesis that the moon is actually a hollow tritium shell, while the moon's surface is littered with rare materials, such as tritium, the theory is equal parts true and equal parts false. It's true that there is tritium on the surface of the moon in great abundance. However, it's probably false that the moon is made of a tritium shell. The reason for why tritium exists isn't 100% understood, but it is believed to have to do with an interaction between the solar wind from our star and the radiation from other nearby stars. Supposedly, this would result in a chemical reaction with the moon's regolith to store and create various chemical reactions leading to many rare earth minerals and elements such as tritium. And speaking of things on the moon's surface, the craters, the goddamn craters. We pointed out the depth of craters are uniform across the surface, no matter how wide the crater is. Scientists have a few explanations for the depth issue of craters on the moon. The best theory that scientists have to explain the depth issue has to do with some sort of volcanism that takes place on the moon that would coat the moon in a layer of sediment on a regular basis. This theory has an issue as it contradicts the age of the potential volcanism sediment on the moon's surface. However, this is just a theory to potentially explain this phenomenon. I honestly don't believe this idea explains the issue presented, but in fairness, it's important to present as many facts as possible regarding such claims. This is one of those counter-arguments for the issue of the crater depth. It should also be known that there are many different kinds of craters, and there is some variation in depth due to the different subtypes of craters. Primarily the idea that there are craters that get hit by something and it makes a wider crater and half the crater kind of falls off and it creates this weird shape that can sometimes give a little bit extra depth. If you're curious to know more about these kinds of craters, we'll include a link in the description below that has some pretty fascinating information. So we've discussed subterranean cavities and now the craters on the moon. How about a light show on the moon's surface? Specifically, the mysterious lights on the moon's surface. Scientists suggest that lunar impacts are the cause for these bright flashes. Scientists also believe that these collisions can enact chemical reactions with certain moon regolith to create sustained burns for periods of time. It should be noted that this does not adequately spot all of the odd lights that have appeared on the surface of the moon, or sustain the luminosity of some of those lights. So in my particular opinion, I think that while lunar impacts could be the cause of some of the bright flashes, the sustained glows that are often found around the perimeter of some craters are still mysterious, and I think scientists have yet to fully crack what they mean. Let's get into a little bit more detail about the following images here. These yellow lights depict the areas in which these mysterious lights are seen. Some of them are in isolated places or in locations where it absolutely could be the cause of a chemical reaction. However, some of these take place in dark areas and some of the deep craters where there shouldn't be anything there. It should be blown out entirely, but you can find these lights here. So while some lights might be created by chemical reactions, not all of them can be because of this. Some people have actually suggested that lights on the moon are created by being hit with energy against a magnetic field similar to how our aurora borealis works. The atmosphere, while thin around the moon, would be buffeted by these high energy particles in a similar fashion, creating these lights that would last as long as the reaction was occurring. Unfortunately, there's no idea to know whether or not this is true. There have been no studies in this particular area. There's no research that I could find for these kinds of claims. But it's still a very interesting thought, and I think an interesting hypothesis that should really be researched. Or at least, if there is research out there, I'd love to see it if any of you guys find it. All right, moving on to a different type of light. There are reports of a mysterious lights that followed the spacecrafts during the Apollo missions. This is 100% true. There were anomalous, weird lights that seemed to follow the spacecraft, according to reports by both Neil and Buzz. And it was first thought that the reasons these lights were following them had to do with the fact that one of the booster stages that took them into orbit had followed them to some extent and was refracting light. However, this would be dismissed by both Buzz and Neil due to the color spectrum that was emitted from this particular light. So I'll leave it up to you guys as to what was following Buzz and Neil, but it sure as hell wasn't a rocket booster. Speaking of even more weird things on the moon's surface, some people swear that there are non-natural structures on the surface that have been removed from pictures published by NASA for the public to view. Well, there's a bit tricky things going on. I want there to be alien structures on the surface of the moon. That would just be super cool. The United States isn't the only country to have visited the moon, and many of these countries that have are not exactly friendly with the US. I have to believe that if another country visited the moon and took pictures of the moon, that they would have seen these reported structures and said something by now. Also, we have pretty good telescopes today. If a large structure was visible on the side of the moon that we do see, then I think we would have seen it by now, or would at least have been given a clue as to what the odd thing might be. Turns out there actually is an odd thing on the surface of the moon that no one seems to understand. And it's this big giant square block. So is the block an alien thing? Or is it some sort of odd geological formation? Who knows? I'm sure someone someday will figure it out. However, there is no credible evidence for or against this particular hypothesis of structures on the moon, especially on the dark side of the moon. If you guys would like to see an episode about the dark side of the moon, we can definitely do that. Just make sure to like the episode and add it in the suggestion for the comments. All in all, I think the moon is really strange. While we didn't get into discussing all the hypotheses surrounding the moon's formation, many of the theories I've heard don't quite adequately explain how the moon came here. I think a lot of people will dismiss ancient traditions and religious historical events until scientific proof of these versions of events arise. But until that occurs, these maybe shouldn't be dismissed all over. Another thought I have is of the doctoring of photos that we alluded to earlier. NASA has a nasty history of doctoring photos. Famous cases are like the orangish reddish tint of images of Mars, the fact that the original negatives of the moon mission are all gone, the fact that many of the telescope images of stars are edited and tweaked to better represent what's shown rather than being in a series of pixels. To me, if they're capable of doctoring these photos, then they're really equally likely to edit things out as well. Potentially dangerous evidence such as alien life on the moon. Enough about NASA though. Let's get back to the moon itself. While I find some things to be dismissed about the strangeness of the moon, I can't shake the weirdness of the fact that everywhere you look on the surface of the moon, there are impact craters. Big, small, medium, weird, horizontal, halfway glancing kind of blows, and yet all of them only go to a certain depth, no matter how big they are. And that's really weird. Like, really, really weird. I can't think of anything on Earth that's like that. I mean, if you hit something with enough force, it's going to make a big hole. If you hit something with a small amount of force, it's going to make a small hole. The moon doesn't seem to obey the same kinds of physics, and this is a mystery I hope to understand, or at least, hopefully find an answer soon. It definitely leaves my head scratching. For now, I'll leave you with this strange image. And hopefully we'll see you in the next one. Later.